Okay, so this project is about concerned parents of Wampatuck. It's like civic voices to see how like parents of like Scituate stood up to the proving grounds. And this is Debbie Mariano, who was one of the head people of Concerned Parents of Wampatuck. So what was your childhood like?
I grew up in Schenectady, New York, which is upstate New York, and it is a town that has had an awful lot of contamination in it from GE, General Electric. So that when you grow up in an area that has a lot of contamination around it, you tend to see a lot of cancers. And so you actually feel what can happen to families because of irresponsible dumping by companies.
So for this whole like project in Proving Grounds, when did you become aware of like the situation, and when did you start to like stand up for what was going on?
There was a group that had already been formed by Ronnie Kent and Christine Loeb, and they lived closer to the Proving Grounds on the other side of Hatherley Road towards the number streets. And they had found out that there was going to be a development in the Proving Grounds, and they were very concerned because they had seen evidence of all kinds of barrels dumped in the wetlands. So there was hundreds of these barrels, just rusted barrels.
Yeah.
And they took pictures of them and they brought them to the DEP. And they started to let other people around the community know about it. And so they had a coffee, and we started hearing about what was happening, and we realized that the Proving Grounds are adjacent to Wampatuck School. So they're right next to Wampatuck School, where of course all the kids are playing and all the kids are outside. So from that we started exploring what really had happened in the Proving Grounds. And the Proving Grounds was a place that the Army used to prove the howitzer gun. So what they did is they would just see if this cannon worked, and in doing so, all that spent ammunition went all over the Proving Grounds, and that was part of the contamination of the Proving Grounds. And they left it all there, and they let it sit there, and all those chemicals leached into the soil. So when you talk about a development, what you're talking about is all of the dirt and all of the earth moving, and all of those contaminants going out into the air. So you have to make sure that that's done responsibly. And we weren't really sure that that was going to happen, and we knew that aside from the community group, which was Ronnie and Christine, that we needed to form a group that really watched out to see that those kids at Wampatuck School were going to be taken care of, and that those contaminants, when they were airborne, weren't going to affect the kids outside in the playground.
So what steps were taken during like this process to stop the development of the Proving Grounds?
What we ended up doing is first forming the group, and then deciding who would do what pieces of what within the group. And then we had to reach out and find out where are there resources available that we can use. So what we did is we worked with a group called Toxics Action in Boston, and we partnered with them, and they helped us kind of define our goals of our group and where we wanted to move forward to. They had a lot of action that they would take within different communities, and they also had a big knowledge base, so we could understand just what those chemicals and components were and how they were toxic and what that could lead to. They suggested that we get something called a licensed site professional. So an LSP is someone who is actually allowed on the site. They have a science background, and they know all about toxicology, and they're paid for. So we were able to raise money, and we were able to get a grant. We wrote a grant, and we were grant funded so that we would have the money to pay for our own licensed site professional. So you have the company doing the cleanup, but our licensed site professional could go on the grounds and make sure that every step of the way was done safely for the kids. So we did that. We had a petition signed by all kinds of people. I can't remember the number, probably 500, that said we want to make sure this is done safely. We were able to submit that to the company.
You mentioned that one of the groups helped you define your goals. So what exactly were your goals?
Our goals were that we wanted to make sure that the Proving Grounds was cleaned up to the highest possible standards. So, not that, hey, they leave a little bit of lead in the soil, but they would really do a good job of really getting that out there because, one thing, and this was for me personally, one thing was the cleanup, that the kids would be safe at Wampatuck. What you want to make sure is that if your kids go outside and they play in the sandbox and they dig in the soil, that's safe for them. Mm-hmm. So imagine if you had come in and you buy a house in the proving grounds and nobody made sure that soil was cleaned up. Mm-hmm. And so now your family and maybe your mother would end up with breast cancer because nobody cared enough. But number two was while they were doing that cleanup, that every safety precaution that was available would be taken for our kids mm-hmm. on the playgrounds at Wampatuck. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to make sure that those things were followed, and those were pretty much our goals. And I think that it ended up being, and I hope, a community gain. Mm-hmm. The kids were pretty much really well protected, so and the teachers at that school too.